On this episode of The Brothers Mysterium.
I was trying to think of like a cool subject matter, and I was thinking of, like cursed objects, haunted objects, and it just kept coming back to the idea of dolls.
And you'd have to stay in there with the lights out, facing this group of super, super creepy looking dolls.
And they'd play in the room together. The parents would hear two different voices. And when they went in to check on it, they'd only see little Gene. And whenever he got in trouble, he'd say, "I didn't do it, Robert did it." He'd blame the doll.
On today's episode, we discuss the possibility of dolls being possessed by spirits. We then speak with author David L. Sloan about the most famous of them all, Robert the Haunted Doll. My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Welcome back to another episode of The Brothers Mysterium. My name is Tommy. His name is Eric.
Hey, yo.
And today we got another one of our sort of off-topic, little more obscure subject matters. And today we're going to be talking about haunted dolls, specifically Robert the Doll.
Yeah, Robert the Doll is definitely probably one of the creepiest looking haunted dolls, or supposedly haunted dolls, I have ever seen. He's got these they look like pock marks. Pieces of his face have been etched away. And it just, it adds to the creepiness. He's got these beady eyes. You really have to, we're going to post a lot of pictures of Robert the Doll here because he's crazy to look at.
Definitely. Facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium will have a whole Robert the Doll album with different pictures of him. And I was trying to think of a cool subject matter, and I was thinking of, like cursed objects, haunted objects, and it just kept coming back to the idea of dolls because they're just so creepy. I don't know anybody that really likes old dolls. And there's three, I would say, of the most famous dolls are Annabelle, Harold, and then by far, in my opinion, the most famous is Robert. So that's where we decided to start. And one thing I want to say is, at first it seems kind of ridiculous. I was actually talking to somebody about how we're going to do this episode, and they kind of blew it off right away as the old, what? A living haunted doll? That's stupid. That's absurd. You guys usually have better topics on your show. Might not listen to that one. To which I told him, well, do you believe in ghosts or spirits existing? And he was like, oh, yeah. And I said, well, do you believe in haunted houses? And he was like, of course, there's tons of stories on haunted houses. And I was like, well, how is that any different if a spirit, an entity, instead of haunting a house or living in a house, has chosen a smaller vessel and is now inhabiting a doll? It's the same theory. It's just, in a different form. And then he was suddenly, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. So I just want to throw that out there for the listeners who might right off the bat think that's a little absurd. Of course, you think of Chucky, and it definitely sounds very B-movie horror-ish. But as you'll find out listening, it's actually a really cool and creepy concept.
When people picture a doll being haunted, I think they immediately think of Chucky. And I think there's an Annabelle movie that either just came out or is on its way in production. But people think of this doll as suddenly taking on all these human characteristics, it blinks, its mouth moves, it moves exactly like a person moves. But when you consider it in the way that you just said, almost like a ghost or a spirit using this object as now a vessel, and they may not be causing it to do all these things that humans do and that you see the haunted dolls do in movies, it puts more of an applicable understanding to it,
Exactly, yeah. It's attached itself to the doll. So to your point, it's not jumping up and chasing you through the house running, but there's definitely other weird phenomenon that we'll hear about with, giggling noises. Maybe it's suddenly, take on a different look in its eyes. So we'll definitely jump into that. And one thing I do want to quickly mention, just from our own experiences, as we always like to share, once again, going back to our neighbors the elderly women.
This is Aunt W and Aunt F. We labeled them in one episode, didn't we?
We did.
Okay.
So this is actually going to be Aunt B, who was, what was her relation to the other two?
She was their aunt, their actual aunt, their biological aunt.
That's crazy.
So she was the oldest of the elderly women living in this house.
Yeah, so great, cool lady. Was always awesome with us. Loved to play games and let us hang out and stuff. But she lived in the basement, and she had a collection of dolls from her like youth, which to us were just creepy ass, old, scary dolls. And they were like in the window. So anytime I'd walk by the window, I would look at them and be afraid that one of them was suddenly going to, snap its head towards me. Or anytime we were inside the basement, hanging out, waiting for her, or whatever, I was always just like uneasy with all these sets of doll eyes staring at me. So I think it's something most people can relate to, where even if you're not, afraid of dolls, you have a phobia of them, there is something kind of unsettling and eerie and creepy about just like an old doll.
Definitely. And I guess we have to credit this house that we always refer to, our neighbor's house, as kind of like forming the base of our interest in the paranormal, because we conducted all kinds of investigations as children in this house. But also to add now to your story, I remember a birthday party I had as a kid, and my birthday's in October, so it's close to Halloween, although not as close as yours, because yours is the day before Halloween.
Yeah, that's why hundreds of kids go out and wreak havoc in their neighborhoods in my honor on a Mayhem Night, Cabbage Night, Tommy Mysterium Night, or Devil's Night, depending where you live.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, it was my birthday, so we always try to find something, scary to do that's related to it. So maybe like 6th grade we're talking here, so maybe like 12 years old. And we decided to do like a bravery test kind of thing, where we kind of snuck into my neighbor's basement one at a time, and you'd have to stay in there with the lights out facing this group of super, super creepy looking dolls. And you had to stay in there for 10 minutes. And I did it no problem because, like I said, I've been hanging out in this house for years. It was always a little unsettling, but at that point I was like, I think I can stomach 10 minutes instead of looking like a coward in front of my friends. But I remember some kids, a minute and a half, 3 minutes would go by, and these kids would come out and just be like, I can't do it. There's no way. It's too much. And they were absolutely terrified of this just group of dolls sitting there. Some of them had like one eye half open, definitely had not been cared for really since Aunt B had passed away. So there, dust on them, cobwebs, that kind of stuff. Just super creepy.
Yeah, and it talks a lot about just like fear, and we always say like nothing's scarier than your own imagination, whereas those dolls, I'm positive, were not haunted or anything like that. They had no spirits with them, but still there was something weird. And I even remember thinking to myself, like, well, if one of them got up and attacked me, I could like crush it, I could kick it, I could easily beat up a doll. But I still had this weird sense of like, I could be in danger, something strange could happen in here. And like, as you mentioned, the older and the more kind of beat up wear and tear they have, it just adds to their overall creepiness.
Yeah.
Once we kind of targeted in on Robert the Doll as going to be the subject, there was really only one person who we could talk to, who we wanted to talk to, and that's the man who literally wrote the book on Robert the Doll. The book is titled Robert the Doll, appropriately. And that's author and expert David L. Sloan, who was cool enough to talk with us. And not only does he know, like, probably more than anyone, the entire history of the doll and has done his research, which allows him to make educated guesses and have theories with real insight behind them as to what might be going on. But he's spent a ton of time alone with Robert.
Yeah.
He's sort of the ideal person and the top tier source of information on Robert. So it was awesome to be able to speak with him.
Definitely.
The Brothers.
Mysterium.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, David?
I'm doing good.
So as we mentioned earlier, this is David L. Sloan, and he's the kind of guy that wears many hats throughout his busy day. He's an author, a ghost hunter. He runs his own company that has ghost tours and ghost hunts down in Key West, Florida. He's a baker. He's even the curator for the largest collection of haunted items in South Florida.
So I keep them in a bar downtown. I keep them locked up in a case. I don't want them in my house.
Right. Smart man.
So it goes without saying that Tommy and I were excited to have David on the show. And the feeling was mutual.
Yeah, this is something I've been looking forward to.
And just like we said in our opening discussion, one of the most highlighted elements of David's career is his work and research on a rather spooky doll named Robert.
There's definitely something inside of the doll. I'm 100% convinced that he's a haunted doll.
Many of you may have already heard of Robert, as he's one of the most famous, if not the most famous, of the haunted or enchanted dolls that are out there.
He stands about 4 feet tall, and he's stuffed with straw. He's covered in fabric. He almost looks like a burn victim, but that's from partly his age, partly from some termite damage to his face.
One look at Robert is all it takes to instill a chilling sense of curiosity in the eye of the beholder. And in the imagination of one who doesn't know the real backstory, Robert appears to be almost like the poster child, if you will, for the living or haunted doll concept that is embedded in the more mysterious and abnormal elements of our cultural lore. So much so that some even believe he was the inspiration for Chucky. You know, that murderous doll from the Child's Play series.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Yeah, that's completely not true. And it's something that's kind of gone into culture, and it's spread across the internet because it makes a great story. But no, Robert was not the inspiration for Chucky. You can actually find interviews with the people who were responsible for the whole Child's Play franchise, and they were inspired by Cabbage Patch Kids and the My Buddy dolls.
My buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy. Wherever I go, he goes. My buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy and me.
My Buddy from Play School.
But even before that, they had Talking Tina on the Twilight Zone. The little doll that was going to kill everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
She's alive, Daddy, and her name is Talkie Tina. My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you.
All right, so before we focus the lens directly on Robert, let's consider dolls in general. Because, let's face it, haunted or not, they tend to creep people out a lot.
Yeah, there's a whole theory out there. It's called the uncanny theory, and it talks about how close things look to the human form as to how much they, I guess you could say, repel us. Where, you could look at a robot.
Take R2-D2, for example.
And the robot's not too close to humans, so it's like, that's okay. But then the more realistic it starts becoming, the more it can kind of repel us.
So when human traits are mixed with the inanimate and simple characteristics of a mere object in a way that's just right, it creates an unsettling paradox in the human mind. However, David believes that this same theory might help explain how a doll becomes possessed or haunted in the first place.
If a spirit no longer has the shell that it used to live in, it's going to go towards something that looks familiar, right?
Right, yeah, that makes sense. It's humanoid for sure.
And just like Tommy and I had said earlier, David is careful not to take this supernatural personification too far.
People say when a doll moves, they expect him standing up and doing a little jig, something like that. And that's not normally the case.
Keeping all that in mind, let's wind the clocks back to 1996, where David Sloan's experience with Robert the doll begins.
I've always been into ghosts, and I quit my corporate job. I used to manage cruise ships and moved to Key West to start a ghost tour. And I was following up on different leads, and there had been an article about the ghost of Ann Otto, and that was the wife of Gene Otto.
Right.
Remember those names, because Ann and Gene Otto and their home in Key West, known as the Artist House, are all a very key part of Robert's history.
So I went to the Artist House, and I talked to the owner. It was a guy named Daryl. And I said, hey, I'm starting a ghost tour in town. I'm here to talk to you about your ghost. He said, oh, you want to hear about Robert? I said, no, I'm here to talk to you about Ann. Who's Robert? He said, oh, Robert's a doll. He's a haunted doll. I thought that this guy is crazy.
Right, sure.
Yeah, so he told me a little bit about Robert. He says, do you want to see the room where Robert lives? Yeah, sure. And he goes, come on, let's go upstairs.
Daryl then leads David through the old Victorian house and up to the second floor, until eventually they come to a steep staircase that leads up to the attic.
When we get to the top of the attic, there's a little hatch that you push open. And we go up, I stepped inside. The place looked like someone was expecting to have a little key party with a bunch of kids.
David told us that this attic was adorned with tiny furniture, including a doll-sized bench and chairs. But there were no dolls in the room.
This room was sectioned off from the rest of the attic, so it was like a certain area just for Robert. And so that has a little creep factor to it.
Absolutely.
Without any explainable reason, David suddenly finds himself overcome by a disturbing and nauseating feeling.
I was just overcome with this negative heat energy, and I was overwhelmed by this feeling. And I felt like I was going to throw up if I didn't get out of there.
This strange experience in the artist house piques David's curiosity in Robert. From here, he gets in touch with the Fort East Martello Museum, where Robert was placed after being removed from the artist house.
And eventually the curator there, her name is Stacy, said, "Oh yeah, you can come see Robert, come at this time." And I went, and Robert was kept up in the back. And none of the employees wanted to be the ones to bring him out, because they all knew there was something weird about him.
While the staff members at the museum deliberate over who will have the dreaded job of taking Robert out of storage, David waits by himself in a room in the museum. Eventually, Stacy, the curator, emerges.
And I'm alone in the room. She goes back and she goes to storage and she brings out this little chair with Robert sitting in it. And she's talking to Robert. And she says, "Hey, Robert, this is David. He's starting up a ghost tour in town. He wanted to come and say hello to you and take some photographs. I hope you'll be nice to him." And again, I think, okay, another crazy person.
Yeah, that's definitely odd.
And then she sat Robert down on his table on the chair. And she said, "Let me know if you need anything. I'll be in my office." And she left.
So before we continue with David's one-on-one face-to-face meeting with Robert, this is probably a good time to explain how this doll earned his unnerving reputation. So let's wind the clock back even further now, to the year 1900. And this chapter of our story starts with two families in Key West, the Abbotts and the Ottos. According to David, the eldest man in the Otto family is a doctor, and he has a son who is also a doctor.
There was a long string of doctors in this family.
And this second Dr. Otto had a son of his own.
His name was Robert Eugene Otto.
All right. Now, who's in the Abbott family?
A man who was a servant for Gene's grandfather, and his name was William Abbott. William Abbott he was really close with the family. You know, he was almost a part of the family. So when Gene's grandfather died, Gene's father hired William to work at his pharmacy.
So, William Abbott is working for young Robert Eugene's father in the family pharmacy, and all is well in Key West. It's around this time that young Robert Eugene receives a special gift from his parents, a doll.
He was actually made in Germany at the Steiff Company. And the Steiff Company, they're the ones who are responsible for inventing the teddy bear.
Oh, wow.
Now, when he got the doll, they say that he gave the name Robert to the doll. He gave his own first name to the doll. And he went by his middle name for the rest of his life.
I'll name you Robert.
And he became bizarrely attached to the doll.
I love you, Robert.
And they spent all their time together. And they'd play in the room together. The parents would hear two different voices. And when they went in to check on it, they'd only see little Gene. And whenever he got in trouble, he'd say, "I didn't do it, Robert did it." He'd blame the doll.
Robert did it. It wasn't me. Robert, you got me in trouble.
It's at this point in the conversation that Tommy and I begin to wonder whether or not the doll, now named Robert, had arrived in the Otto household with an evil spirit already inside of it.
Well, I think the doll arrived. Probably, what I believe now is that in the initial years, it might have just been a doll.
So if the doll wasn't already cursed or haunted, where did this entity that's later believed to inhabit Robert come from? Of course, after all the research he's done into the subject, David L. Sloan has a theory. And it's a pretty good one. So let's flip it back to William Abbott, the servant working in the Otto pharmacy.
He had a wife. Her name was Emmeline. And I was digging through different census records trying to find out more about her. And in 1900, she showed no children. In 1910, she showed one child deceased. So you figure Robert arrived around 1904. Sometime between 1900 and 1910, Emmeline had a child and the child died. Now, if her child was sick or dying, where would she have taken the child? To the doctor's house, right?
Sure, yeah.
So Jean's father being a doctor, I think what happened is the Abbott child was brought there, and I think the Abbott child died inside the artist house. And I think its spirit entered this doll. I believe Jean was talking not to a doll. I think he could see the spirit of that little kid.
Naturally, time passes, and Gene Otto grows up. All throughout the years, he maintains his bizarre friendship with Robert the doll.
You know, because you'll hear about Gene going through his entire life and always having that connection with the doll, even in his later years. And you know, Gene was an artist. He was a creative type. I think he maybe never lost that ability to see spirits. And you know, maybe he wasn't as crazy as everybody thought. But maybe he had just made a friend of this with the ghost of this little boy who died. Yeah, and he was definitely a creative type. He was a little bit eccentric, some would say. He was an artist, or he became an artist. And, you know, it's interesting, he went off to France to work in his art. He was there in the 20s. At the same time, Hemingway was there. That's where he met his wife.
This would be Anne Otto. And if you remember back a little ways, this is the person that David was originally interested in getting information about to start his ghost tour, which inevitably led him to Robert.
And I kind of think he married her more for her money, but she was in for quite a shock when they came back to Key West. They moved back to Key West when they were both in their early 40s, and that's when she discovered the doll.
And is she the one who had some experiences with the doll, like constantly moving and hearing giggling and stuff like that?
What we know about Anne Otto, she didn't care for the doll. I talked to one of her really good friends, the guy who lived across the street, and he told me that after Jean had passed away, and this was 1974, Jean was 74 years old, Jean's will wrote Anne out of ownership of pretty much the house, all of their antiques, everything. So she was pretty bitter about that.
Huh. Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think this is what caused, you know, a lot of people say he was very cruel to her. I don't think there was physical abuse. I think at the end he just wrote her out, and she'd given up most of her life to be the artist's wife.
Right.
It caused a lot of strife there. But I talked to this guy, and he doesn't like talking about the doll. He wishes he had burned the doll. He actually bought the house from Anne. I asked him, I said, you know, I was asking mainly about Anne and Jean, trying to get more of a picture of what they were like. And I asked him, I said, did Anne say anything about it? And he said, oh, yeah. She said, I hate that damn doll. It was his only friend. Of course, he never could make any friends of his own.
Wow, very creepy.
So we know that Anne didn't like the doll. That confirms so many of the stories.
So at this point, Jean is dead. Anne has moved out. And like you heard David say, Anne didn't get any of Eugene's possessions in his will. So, what becomes of Robert and the artist house? Well, the house gets sold. And let's just say it comes with some additional items.
There was a cedar chest on the second floor, and Robert was in that chest. And a few different people owned it, and it was people like a plumber would be in there doing some work. And he saw the doll move from side to side.
What?
And he heard the doll giggle. There were a couple of guys who rented the place, and I talked to them probably 15 years ago. They said they'd always hear someone moving around upstairs. And if they went to check it out, they'd find the doll in a different location. They really thought that they were playing tricks on each other.
Right, for sure.
Mainly after the Ottos were both gone, that everybody else started seeing what Robert was up to.
I kind of recall a story, and it may or may not be true, where somebody was like, found the doll with scissors or a knife or something like that. Is that a true account?
No, that's most likely a fabrication. And, you know, I don't know every single encounter that happened with Robert.
Right.
But that's not really fitting. And Robert takes this incredible hold on people. And some of those people believe they have these things happen. There's one guy who rented the house, and he wrote almost a manifesto about how Robert had given him yellow fever and locked him in the attic for nearly 30 days.
Oh, my gosh.
Whether that happened or not, who's to say? But this guy believed it happened. He was in the house with the doll. So Robert does strange things. And I've talked to hundreds of people over the years who've had things happen. If you go up to the museum where Robert is now, there's letters all over the walls of people writing to ask forgiveness from Robert. And I think some of them are crazy. But and then you see some of these things, and you see the trends, and you see the same things happening over and over again, and you say, wow, there's something to this.
All right, so let's fast forward now, back to 1996, right into that room in the Fort East Martello Museum, where David is now face-to-face and completely alone with Robert the doll.
So I'm alone in the room with Robert, and I started taking some photographs. And then I said, okay, I'm going to get a photograph without his hat. He wears the little sailor hat. So I leaned over to grab his hat. And I swear to you, the doll moved. He looked at me like, don't you dare touch my hat. That same exact negative heat energy that I felt upstairs in this former room filled this room. I tried to take some photographs to show the difference in how he looked. Boom, boom, boom. 3 shots, none of them came out. Okay? I set the camera down for a second, see what's wrong with it. Boom, boom, boom. It goes off 3 times. I pick it up again because it's now working. I try to take another shot. Nothing. I mean, he knew very well what was going on. But that's the first time that convinced me. I said, okay, well, there's something to this doll. And then it's kind of been, one of my passions. I've always wanted to find out, okay, what's the truth? Because there's so many legends out there about Robert. And I really wanted to get to the bottom of them. Because, there's no denying there's something in that doll.
Do you think Robert is evil or malicious? Because, like you said, everybody's very respectful of him. They even introduced you. Hey, Robert, please behave. If you kind of mess with him, you felt like the negative heat energy. People that come to the museum and kind of mock him and stuff have bad luck and end up writing apology letters. Do you think there's an evil, malicious side to the spirit in Robert?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is multiple spirits. And I'm pretty convinced now that Robert is that innocent little boy. The other ones that are there, I believe Gene Otto is there sometimes. And I think Gene's protective to a degree. I don't think he's one of the more active. But then there's 2 other entities, and I'm not sure who they are. But these are the ones that seem to thrive off of the negativity. And what I've found with the whole spirit world, I think there's spirits looking for energy, and they'll fill in whatever need there is. So I think there's other spirits that have come down there, and they're latching on to these people who are looking for negative. I think they're giving it to them. I think these are the ones that follow people home. I think these are the ones that cause people problems. When they joke around, when they give the finger to the casemate, when they do any of those things, I think these ones are there saying, cool, let's thrive on this energy.
Right, yeah, they're sort of inviting that negative energy in with their actions.
Yeah, so I think that's what it is. I don't think, when people say, hey, I went to visit Robert and this happened, yeah, that stuff's happening. I think, though, the actual spirit of Robert, I'm pretty much convinced about it being the child of Emily and Abbott. The night that I did the Coast to Coast interview.
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. David Sloan with us. David is an author, ghost hunter, haunted historian.
I was alone with Robert up at the museum. And the interview started at 1 o'clock in the morning here in Key West time.
He's still on display down in Florida, isn't he?
Yeah, he sure is. He's on display at the Fort East Martello Museum.
As a matter of fact, I am standing about a foot away from him right now.
You are next to him?
And being alone in the fort with Robert's pretty interesting. And I've had good times with Robert, I've had bad times. I try to be very respectful. We wanted to do it right here where Robert is so he can kind of weigh in on things. There's this old horse-drawn hearse right across from where he is. There's a long rail. So I had some notes lined up there, just, some things so I could reference and make sure I was getting everything correct. But it meant having my back to Robert. I've been up here alone for about an hour. I brought some of my ghost hunting equipment, and there's already been some pretty cool things happening. So
I got to tell you, David, if the phone goes dead or something happens to you, we're going to call for help.
So with the ghost hunt, we use different things, and there's one trigger device I use, and it's a doll that looks like Annabelle, but it has a K2 meter built into it, and her head will light up or her hands will light up when there's a lot of electromagnetic activity.
Right.
I had gone around Robert's basement, and there was nothing really happening. And then I sat her down on the rail, and I said, listen, Robert, I'm at my back to you. If you need me for anything, or if you don't like anything I'm saying, just go over and touch her hand. She'll light up, and I'll know to change the subject. Because Robert's been very clear. There's things that I could not put in the book. So when I did that, the interview hadn't even started, and I was walking over, and the doll started lighting. I said, is that you, Robert? Boom, boom. It lit up for yes. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? And it blinked as if that was okay. And I started asking questions about my theory about Emmeline Abbott being the mother of the child and who the child was. And I asked probably 10 or 12 questions, and it confirmed all of them. And then it got tired and stopped. The rest of the interview, and this was a 2-hour segment, the doll did not blink once. In the time we've been on the phone since, there's not been a single blink from the doll. Yeah, and I had some really bad times with Robert. I mean, the book, I think it took me, I researched for nearly 20 years, but the writing process, 4 or 5 years, and I stopped several times. I lost several hard drives on my computer, and the computer would lock up and just die at the same point every time. It was when I was trying to write this certain thing about the doll. And by the third time, I had backups everywhere. I had a paid subscription service in Texas where every keystroke was registered. So I could not lose this manuscript again. And I lost it again. And when they sent me a drive that had everything, it had everything except the book. And to me, that's impossible. There really isn't any way for that to happen, but it did.
All right. So you're probably wondering what kind of things have happened with Robert since 1996 up until now. Well, there's a lot of good stories.
Yeah, a couple months ago, there was a group of people up there, and there was a drunk lady who was taunting Robert. And there were about 30 people gathered around the doll. Robert holds a little lion. They call him Leo the lion. He's a little stuffed doll. Robert threw this doll towards the lady. But the doll hit the case. It was as if he was throwing it right at her.
Right, and there's 30 people around to witness it too, so that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so that's a definite case of moving. And that lends credence to the stories. There was this is going back shortly after Robert was put on display. There was a lady who was the curator at the museum, and she came in, and there was a little desk. She was leaning over checking the sign-in book from the previous day, and she felt somebody come up behind her and give her like a little tap just above her butt. And she finishes. She kind of said, okay, just a second. She looked at the rest of the names, and then she turned around. She said she saw Robert back into his case.
It may have been a little hard to hear there because David's phone cut out for a second. But what he said was, this woman turned around and saw Robert climbing back into his case.
Now, she took off. She left. She ran screaming out of the museum. And one of the guys doing maintenance there, he was trying to find out what was wrong with her. He thought she had lost a member of her family or something. And she was, a quarter of a mile away by the time he caught up with her. When he touched her shoulder, like, hey, wait, she was so freaked out, she turned around, scratched him across the face. She would not go back near there. She left her bike there. She didn't want anything. She ended up moving out to California. Yeah, Robert made a big impact on her.
I had heard rumors, and maybe it's one of those incidents, that now Robert is almost like anchored or kind of shackled inside of the case with twine or something around his ankle. Is that true? Because I heard, like you said, other people had seen him moving, and there was something about somebody even saw like dust footprints. Can you talk that that's true at all?
Yeah, during the incident where he had touched the curator there, the museum's open air, so it's very dusty, man. It's an old Civil War fort, so there usually was a pretty good layer of dust on the floor, and there was dirt on the bottom of Robert's feet at that time, and he had recently been cleaned, so the bottoms of his feet were very clean.
Wow. So it definitely makes you wonder.
Yeah, and what you'll find now, when you look at him up at the museum, you'll see a piece of filament or fishing line across his waist, and that's keeping him in his chair, because they have an alarm system underneath him. He's in a large acrylic case, and for them to take the top off of that, they have to contact the alarm company, get them to turn off the alarms, go through a certain protocol of procedures, and then have a couple of people to lift everything. Plus, he's 100 years old plus, so they don't want to be going in there a lot. He was moving around enough that they felt the need to put that. Something really cool that just recently happened. I got a Facebook message from a lady. She went up with her family to see Robert, and her son's autistic. Big fan of Robert. When they went around the doll, they took several pictures of Robert. They asked his permission, and everything was cool. The rest of the family left. They were all going to go back out to their car. And the lady said to her son, she goes, "Oh, we took pictures of Robert, but we didn't get one of you with Robert." I said, "Robert, would that be okay if I got a picture of the two of you together?" She snapped this photograph. There's a silhouette of a small child stepping out of the cage right behind Boy. It's the coolest thing. She just said that to me recently, and it's things like that are so cool. Because I've been there, and I've been there with mediums where, I'm around different haunted places enough that I kind of know their energies. I've been there when this little boy climbs out of the cage, and I felt him. It's almost like I've been able to visualize him. But when I was up there with Beth Rooney, who's a local medium, she said, "He just came out of the cage. He's over here. He's hugging my leg." And that's exactly what I had seen. So it's really cool. So there is that innocent little boy there that will step out of that cage sometimes to people.
Right, cool. And it's cool to know, he's not, trapped in a doll's body. It's just sort of his new home.
I think it's the vessel he feels comfortable with.
Right. Just curious, have you ever taken any thermal photos of Robert or anything to see if there's heat signatures or anything using your paranormal investigative tools to try to get different looks and angles?
I've always considered myself more of a ghost hunter than a paranormal investigator. So I like going there and encouraging the spirits to do things where I can encounter it. But there are people who do like the investigative side of things. There's a guy, you've probably heard of Joshua Warren.
Yep.
He was down here, and I know he put I think he ran some ultraviolet across Robert, and found what he believed to be blood on the sailor suit, and he thought that could have been used in some type of ritual. There's another team down here, and they do some pretty cool stuff. They went up, and they were using the aura cameras to take pictures of Robert. And they detected an aura around the doll. And I think they've got their results posted on YouTube somewhere, so you can probably just search for Robert and aura.
Cool. And do you think Robert is currently happy now being on display in that case? Do you ever get the feeling that Robert wants to come out, wants to, play with somebody, be a little more active? Or what do you think his the current mindset, if you will.
There seems to be a little bit of sadness there. And it used to be, different mediums and psychics would visit him and say that he wanted to go back home. He wanted to go back to the artist house. Since he's been out on display, that seemed to change a lot. When he was locked up, there was that sadness. But now he's on display. And I think some of the people visiting him, it's great. When it's I guess, too many people with the wrong impressions, the people who try to bring up the negative aspects.
Right.
I don't think he really has time for that. I think that gets to him. And you got to figure, how's a little 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy going to respond to different things? He's probably a little bit lonely. But one of the cool things, the museum's under the care of the Key West Art and Historical Society. And the people there, they really care about him. They're required to treat him as an artifact and ensure his preservation and the things like that. But they do treat him more as part of the family. You'll find the people who work at the museum, they talk to Robert. There's people who very much watch out and try to protect him. You get a lot of different TV shows that want to come down there and do a feature on Robert. But they can usually tell from the start, like, well, are you here to do a real story about Robert, or are you here to do an evil doll story?
Right, exactly. Yeah, to protect him from the motives of people trying to cash in on his false reputation there, yeah.
Yeah, so they really do try to look out for him. And there's people in town, there's a lot of people who go visit Robert on a regular basis and talk to him, relate to him in their way with what they think he needs.
Very cool. Good to know he's being taken care of and watched after. You had mentioned you had a device that looked like Annabelle the doll. Have you ever looked into or researched Annabelle? And probably the only other really famous haunted doll I could think of. Have you ever looked into Annabelle or any other dolls for that matter? A
little bit. Whenever articles come up, there was a cool video going around recently with a haunted puppet. It was like a priest puppet or something.
Oh.
But with any of these things, I think without being there and being around it, it's so difficult to gauge what the truth is. I think with any haunted doll, because if you look at all the haunted dolls for sale on eBay,
right,
I don't think there's that many haunted dolls in the world that people are looking to sell.
Right, exactly.
So people know that there's an attraction to haunted dolls, and there's people who will use them unscrupulously. There's a lot of people now, they'll see that Robert's in the museum and that he's getting hundreds of visitors a day, and they say, oh, I can make money if I had a haunted doll.
Right.
There's definitely that element there. So when I look into them, I do it out of curiosity to see what people say about them.
Very cool. And then kind of in closing, what are your thoughts on the haunted doll phrase? Do you think that that's applicable? Is it sort of sensationalizing Robert and what's happening? What do you think?
I don't think it's sensationalizing it. I think people should experience Robert for themselves and make their own decisions. But I've had enough things happen. I'm 100% convinced that he's a haunted doll.
Very cool. David, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your personal stories and all the history of Robert the Doll with us. We really appreciate it.
It's been great talking with you. I really love what you do.
You got it. Yeah, thanks. And hopefully we'll have you on again at some point.
Anytime you want.
Awesome. Thanks again. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.
The Brothers Mysterium.
Once again, I kind of like this interesting offbeat stuff. I don't know too many shows or paranormal ghost hunting shows or whatever that really deal with these topics. They're more just kind of exploring haunted places. So I think it's cool to always come across something new and interesting. And Robert the Doll is definitely interesting. So what are your thoughts on everything we just heard?
I definitely love the backstory. History always interests me, so that is very engaging. I think it's very creepy that Gene Otto, gave his name to this doll and then maintained that for the rest of his life.
It's super weird. Super weird.
Yeah, just the relationship they had. It you would think if it was just an ordinary doll, he would have outgrown this strange obsession with it, to the point where even his wife years later was like, I hate this doll.
Right.
A lot of the stories then later on, as they say, like they sold the house and different people rented it. And I think it's awesome that Robert the doll is up there in this box, as David said. It's almost like he's there in like a casket, like waiting for the next owner to arrive.
Waiting to reemerge.
Yeah. But at the same time, a lot of those then different stories with different people owning the house, it made me think of like Amityville in a way, where like something was known to have happened there. So then people who come in after may be more likely to capitalize on that kind of thing. Like, there were the actual murders in Amityville. And then later on, the people who moved in were like, hey, it's haunted. And now we wrote a book and this and that. So the people who moved in after,
right,
their stories could be like fabricated just because they had prior knowledge of this creepy doll being there.
Right. And even just maybe they weren't trying to cash in on it, just their own fears and stuff, that whenever they heard a noise, they were like, oh my God, it's Robert.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true too. You're always going to be aware of this presence that's there,
And one thing that ties into that, I kind of think, is he said people that visit Robert and are like disrespectful will then have a tragedy happen or get sick or get injured or weird things happen. And then they'll write in a letter. And I wonder how much of that could be legitimate paranormal activity because they disrespected him, and how much of it is just people, in their own mind, like maybe, feeling a little guilty, like, maybe I shouldn't have, given Robert the finger. And then they go home and things happen, and then they just blame it on, oh, great, this is, Robert's getting revenge.
It's almost like, if you know that, or you're privy to that kind of belief, the next bad thing that happens to you, which is going to happen anyway, just the way life works, you're going to then associate the reason to that doll, Robert.
Exactly. It pulls me back to our episode on Point Pleasant and the Mothman, where it's like any tragedy that happened, no matter what it is, they could be like, oh, it's the curse of Chief Cornstalk.
Right.
Whereas any other town has a lot of terrible things happen over time. It's just naturally going to occur.
Yeah.
If there's no curse, people just go, oh, it was just an unfortunate event. But when there's a curse, suddenly you can blame it on the curse.
Definitely. I did think that David's theory about the spirit or the entity feeding on whatever energy is provided was pretty cool. Like he said, like if people are paying attention to an entity, in this case Robert, in any way, it's going to capitalize on that. So like people give it the finger, like he'll take the negative energy and he'll reply with negative energy.
Right.
I've never really heard it explained like that, so I thought that was a cool way of expanding on that idea of like, are spirits negative? Are they positive? But maybe perhaps they're mirroring whatever they can get,
Right. And one thing that I thought was awesome, and like something that I had never heard of before, was his theory about like the child that died.
Right.
Maybe that child's soul is what was put in the doll. I mean, to me, that was sort of like breaking exclusive story type deal, where I had never heard that before, and it makes a lot of sense historically. And, he's done his research, so the records show that there was a child around that time. All the pieces kind of fit. So I thought that was awesome, just talking about kind of unlocking history. And I said it in the open, like his ability to make educated guesses because he knows so much. Like, I thought that was really kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely a pretty cool origin story.
Absolutely.
There are other origin stories out there, which I think mostly deal with a servant like cursing the doll or something like that.
Yeah, it's the generic like voodoo thing or something like that.
But the idea of this child now trapped inside the doll is I find that to be more interesting. Whether it's true or not, it just makes a more interesting story. Especially
because from what we've heard of the accounts of interactions, Robert is a very childlike spirit, sort of in behavior and the way he kind of messes with people and giggling and, pulling hair, tugging on people's pants and stuff like that. It's sort of like he's having fun with them as a kid would.
Poking him in the butt.
Exactly. Not an evil demonic Chucky where he's trying to kill you or whatever, but he's more just kind of messing with you, getting his jollies as like a mischievous young lad would.
Coming to somewhat of a conclusion, I don't really know. I've never been down to Florida. I've never seen Robert yet. I would love to. If I'm in the neighborhood, I'll definitely pop in.
Yeah, we definitely have to. And now that we have a family member in Florida, not that close to Key West, but I would like to venture down there as well and just get some face-to-face time with Robert.
Right. Yeah. And just kind of see how that goes. And exactly like David said, you have to kind of be there to understand what he's saying. And he's even said that, people have come to him with other stories about haunted dolls, or, he's heard of them. And he said the same thing. He's like, I don't really have access to them, so I can't really say. So I think that's how I'm going to leave it. Is I don't know. I find the story intriguing, and one day I would like to get down there and just see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely something going on there, and I can't rule it out. As with Devil's Tower, for example, we were able to find some proof, some death certificates, some real hard evidence, and all the time we had spent there in our younger days, we were able to say, yeah, there's definitely nothing here. Can't do that with Robert the Doll, which in my mind is kind of cool, because we're not out to debunk everything. We just kind of want to investigate it. And it's kind of cool to me that, we really can't draw a conclusion on this one. So
not yet. And we may not be able to even, when we do get a chance to go down there, but it's just exciting to anticipate our own firsthand experience.
Indeed. So yeah, we'll definitely have to get down there, keep everybody updated. And one last time, just want to thank David L. Sloan again for all of his insight, information, and being a great guest on the show. To pick up his book, or any of his books on the ghosts of Key West, you can go to Amazon. If you'd like an autographed copy, be sure to go to robertdidit.com. Or if you want to sign up for a ghost hunt, a ghost tour with David, you can go to keywestghosthunt.com. We definitely recommend it.
Absolutely.
On the next episode of The Brothers Mysterium.
I went downstairs the next morning and I told my mom, I said, I had the weirdest dream last night about Grandpa, and she kind of gave me a look. I told her what had happened, and her eyes just got real big.
He passed away after I got out of college, and we hadn't been close in many years. So it's kind of nice to see him every once in a while.
So I'm already getting the goosebumps just thinking about this story.
And so she turns to me and asks, "Are you okay?" And I was a little bit bewildered because, for one, I wasn't injured, but then neither was she, and she was the one who died in the car accident.
The Chucky clip from this episode comes from the 1988 film Child's Play, produced by United Artists and distributed by MGM. The My Buddy doll is a product of Hasbro Inc. and Play School. The Talkie Tina clip comes from episode 126 of The Twilight Zone, entitled Living Doll. The R2-D2 sounds are from the original Star Wars films, produced by Lucasfilm Ltd. And distributed by 20th Century Fox. Clips of David L. Sloan on Coast to Coast AM come from the Premier Network's talk radio program, Coast to Coast AM. The episode originally aired on Wednesday, June 24th, 2015, and is hosted by George Norrie. Songs from this episode were El Ferrero by Mita Ferrero, A Faust Symphony by Franz Liszt, Funeré by Franz Liszt, and Christmas Concerto in G minor by Arcangelo Corelli. Once again, we want to thank David L. Sloan for being a guest on the show. Additional voices provided by Gwen and Dan Hudson. Young Gene's voice was provided by Jagger Branch. Our theme song is performed by The Never Grin. If you'd like to hear the full unedited interview with David L. Sloan, you can go over to our YouTube page, youtube.com/The Brothers Mysterium, and listen to that uncut version. And if you have a comment about the show, a question, a critique, or anything you want to tell us, you can hit us up at thebrothersmysterium@gmail.com, at Mysterium Bros on Twitter, or our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium. And as always, thank you for listening.